a 15-year-old girl in Florida, wrote down Amelia Earhart's final words 6 days after the Navy declared her dead. The notebook actually survived, and the frequencies did check out. Also, 56 other operators heard the same transmissions across 3 continents. Either the most famous pilot in the world drowned in the Pacific, or 57 strangers invented the same hoax. Which was it? The largest peacetime search in United States Navy history ended in total failure. 17 days. 250,000 square miles of ocean. 9 ships. 66 aircraft. Nothing recovered. On July 19, 1937, the verdict entered the official record. Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan crashed into the Pacific and drowned. That verdict has never been updated. The documentary record tells a different story. Between July 2nd and July 8, 1937, at least 57 radio transmissions were logged by civilian and government operators across North America and the Pacific. Some were dismissed immediately. Others were investigated and classified as physically possible, given the Electra's known equipment. 3 were tracked by the Navy itself using radio direction finding, and 2 triangulated to the same general area southeast of Howland Island. In Florida, a 15-year-old named Betty Klenk wrote down what she heard on her family's shortwave set. A woman's voice, panicked. A man in the background, injured. References to water rising inside the plane. Klenk's notebook survives. The entries are dated. Forensic radio analysts have since confirmed that the frequencies and propagation conditions that evening made reception from the Central Pacific not only possible, but likely. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, a teenager named Dana Randolph heard a woman identify herself as Amelia Earhart and report the aircraft down on land. His father contacted the authorities. The Coast Guard logged the call. The official record acknowledges these signals exist. The official conclusion ignores them. This is the core contradiction. If the Electra went down at sea, it sank within minutes. The Lockheed Electra 10E carried no flotation capacity. Once submerged, its radios, which required engine power to transmit, would not function. A crash at sea renders the 57 post-loss signals physically impossible. And yet the signals exist, documented in period logs, archived in the Coast Guard's own files, and preserved in private notebooks that predate any public awareness of their contents. Something transmitted for 6 days after the crash. Something that knew her voice. Something that used her call sign. For nearly 9 decades, the accepted answer has been hoaxes. All of them. Every single one. 57 independent hoaxes, geographically distributed, technically plausible, containing details unavailable to the public, dismissed as a coincidence of fabrications. The evidence demands a better explanation. What follows is a forensic re-examination of documents, coordinates, transmissions, and physical artifacts that have been in the public record for decades. What the record shows does not match what the record concluded. The case was closed twice. It should not have been closed either time. The crash theory requires one assumption to be true, that Amelia Earhart was not qualified to do what she was doing. The documentary record contradicts that assumption completely. By the time she stepped into the cockpit of the Electra in 1937, she held credentials exceeding those of most commercial pilots then flying. In May of 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Nearly 15 hours in the air. Newfoundland to Northern Ireland. The flight was not ceremonial. A fuel leak developed over open water. Ice formed on the wings. The altimeter failed. She compensated manually, navigated through fog by dead reckoning, and landed in a field outside Derry. The Royal Geographical Society awarded her its gold medal. The United States Congress awarded her the Distinguished Flying Cross. She was the first civilian woman to receive it. 3 years later, in January of 1935, she flew a route that had already cost multiple pilots their lives. Honolulu to Oakland, 2,400 miles of open Pacific. No co-pilot, no support aircraft, no flotation. She used a radio direction finder, celestial navigation, and instrument training to land within minutes of her projected arrival. No one had ever flown that route alone and survived. Records examination confirms her qualifications. She held a transport pilot license, the highest civilian certification available at the time. She was instrument rated when most pilots flew only by visual reference. She had logged over 1,000 documented flight hours across multiple aircraft types, including twin-engine transports. The Electra itself was not a stunt aircraft. The Lockheed Electra 10E was a commercial airliner flown by Pan American, Northwest Airlines, and other carriers. Her specific airframe had been extensively modified at the Lockheed factory under the sponsorship of the Purdue Research Foundation. Additional fuel tanks were installed in the fuselage. Passenger seats were removed. Navigation equipment was upgraded. The modifications were reviewed and signed off by Lockheed engineers before delivery. Her navigator, Fred Noonan, had served as chief navigator for Pan American Airways. He pioneered Pacific route navigation for the company's Trans-Pacific Clipper service. His expertise in celestial navigation over open ocean was, at that time, unmatched in civilian aviation. 2 highly credentialed professionals, 1 extensively modified commercial aircraft, a flight plan reviewed by the Department of Commerce and the United States Navy. This is not the profile of an amateur adventure that ended in amateur catastrophe. And yet the official verdict treats it as exactly that. Any analysis of what happened over the Central Pacific must begin here. The pilot was qualified, the navigator was elite, and the aircraft was sound. Which means the explanation for what went wrong cannot rest on any of those 3. 4 months before her disappearance, Amelia Earhart's world flight ended in a smoking ruin on a runway in Honolulu. It was the first attempt. Almost no one remembers it. On March 20th, 1937, the Electra accelerated down the runway at Luke Field in Hawaii. Partway through takeoff roll, the aircraft ground looped. The right landing gear collapsed. The right wing scraped the tarmac. Sparks ignited a fuel line. The fire was contained. No one was injured. The airframe was severely damaged. The Electra was shipped back to the Lockheed factory in Burbank, California for reconstruction. Rebuilding took approximately 2 months. This accident reset everything that followed. The original world flight plan had routed her east to west. Oakland, Honolulu, Howland Island, Leh, across Asia, across Africa, across the Atlantic, back to Oakland. And that direction took advantage of seasonal weather windows. The Central Pacific leg would have come early, while crew and equipment were fresh. When the aircraft was repaired, she reversed direction, west to east, Oakland, Miami, across the Caribbean, South America, Africa, Asia, Australia, Leh, Howland, Honolulu, Oakland. The reversal was not ceremonial. Weather patterns had shifted with the season. The new routing pushed the Ley to Howland Leg, the longest and most navigationally unforgiving segment of the entire flight, to the end of the journey. Earhart and Noonan would attempt the hardest navigation problem of the trip after accumulating weeks of fatigue. After multiple illnesses, Noonan would later reference in telegrams, and after the aircraft had absorbed the accumulated wear of roughly 22,000 miles of continuous flying. Flight logs documented mechanical concerns during the South Atlantic and African crossings. Navigation instruments required servicing in Karachi. Autopilot repairs were performed in Bandoeng, Dutch East Indies. The aircraft was held on the ground for days at a time for troubleshooting. By the time the Electra landed at Lae, New Guinea on June 29, 1937, it had already flown roughly 22,000 miles. 7,000 miles remained. The hardest 2,556 of those miles waited directly ahead. Earhart had always intended to fly this route at the peak of her abilities, and the reversal meant she would instead attempt its most demanding leg at the worst possible point in the journey. This is not speculation. Her own telegrams from Lae reference exhaustion. Noonan's correspondence references stomach illness. Both acknowledge the difficulty of the leg ahead. The official narrative treats the Lae to Howland flight as an independent event. A bad day. A freak occurrence. The evidence suggests it was the inevitable consequence of everything that had gone wrong before it. Two specific technical flaws had been built into the Pacific leg for years before Earhart arrived at Lae. Neither was corrected before takeoff. The first was geographic. Howland Island sits in the Central Pacific at roughly 0 degrees 48 minutes north, 176 degrees 38 minutes west. United States Navy charts of the 1930s plotted it at a different position. The error ranged between approximately 5 and 6 nautical miles, depending on the chart. Multiple period sources document the discrepancy. The island had been surveyed decades earlier with the navigational technology of the 1890s. It had not been rechecked. Howland is 1.5 square miles of flat coral. Its highest point rises approximately 20 feet above sea level. At haze level and moderate altitude, its visible radius from a cockpit is under 10 nautical miles on a good day. A 5-mile chart error on a 10-mile target is not a rounding issue. It is a miss. The second flaw was electronic. Earhart's aircraft carried a Western Electric Model 13C transmitter operating on frequencies of 3,105 kHz and 6,210 kHz. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca, her primary radio contact at Howland, had direction-finding equipment calibrated for lower frequency bands. The two systems could exchange voice transmissions. They could not reliably exchange the bearings she would need to locate the ship. Lower frequency direction finding required a trailing wire antenna, a long cable unreeled behind the aircraft during flight. Her Electra had been originally equipped with one. By the time she departed for the world flight, it had been removed. Most historians attribute the decision to weight savings or to the inconvenience of reeling the antenna in and out at each stop, but no documentation explains the choice definitively. Without that antenna, she could not transmit on the low frequency that the Itasca's direction finder was designed to receive. The implication is clean. If she could not find Howland visually, she had no reliable backup to find it electronically. The Coast Guard attempted a partial workaround. The Itasca was to generate a column of black smoke from its boilers as a visual beacon. Smoke from a single vessel on open ocean spreads quickly with wind. On the morning of July 2, 1937, surface conditions in the area included scattered cloud and moderate haze. These were not secrets. Department of Commerce correspondence references the radio limitations. Navy planners reviewed the chart issue. Earhart's team understood the communications plan. No one corrected the problems before departure. The flight was sent forward on the assumption that two known flaws would somehow resolve themselves in the air. They did not. At 10 a.m. local time on July 2nd, 1937, the Electra lifted off from Leh, carrying just enough fuel to make Howland with reserve. Footage captured by Pan American engineers that morning shows the aircraft clawing down the grass runway, heavy with fuel, barely clearing the drop to the sea at the end of the strip. The planned flight time was 18 hours. 2,556 miles of open ocean lay ahead, most of it in darkness. For the first several hours, radio traffic followed routine protocol. Earhart transmitted scheduled weather and position reports. The Itasca logged most transmissions at weak signal strength, and Noonan was using celestial navigation through the night, shooting stars when clouds permitted. Then, the timeline begins to fracture. At approximately 2:45 ship time, she reported partly cloudy conditions. Itasca operators requested specific position data. She did not acknowledge the request. Over the next several hours, the pattern repeated. She transmitted. They answered. The answers did not seem to reach her. At 7:42 ship time, her voice came through the Itasca's receivers with unusual clarity. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. Gas is running low. Have been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. The operators replied immediately. She continued transmitting as if nothing had come back. On the Itasca's bridge, officers understood two things. Based on her signal strength, she was within approximately 100 miles of the ship, and she had no way of hearing their instructions. At 7:58, she reported she was circling, but could not hear the Itasca's replies. She asked the ship to take a bearing on her signal. The Itasca could not get a usable bearing on her transmission frequency. She continued calling. The Itasca continued answering. The transmissions passed each other in opposite directions, received only on one side. At 8:43 ship time, her voice came through at maximum signal strength. She reported flying a position line of 157-337. She said she was running on the line north and south. The line came from a celestial observation of the sun. It ran 337 degrees in one direction and 157 degrees in the other. Yet she was somewhere on that line, searching by running back and forth along it. That was the last transmission the Itasca ever received from her. For the next 20 minutes, operators called her name. Nothing came back. For nearly 9 decades, the accepted interpretation has been that she crashed into the ocean shortly after that transmission. The radio logs tell a more complicated story. 7 minutes after the radio went silent, the Coast Guard began hunting in the wrong direction. At approximately 9 a.m. ship time on July 2nd, the Itasca pulled anchor and steamed northwest of Howland Island. The assumption was logical on its face. Earhart had been approaching from the west, from Leh. If she had overshot the island in haze, she would most likely be in the water on the far side of it. And the Itasca searched the northwestern quadrant for 48 hours. Nothing was found. Within 72 hours, the United States Navy committed resources on a scale never previously deployed in a peacetime civilian rescue. The battleship USS Colorado was dispatched from Pearl Harbor. The aircraft carrier USS Lexington was diverted from California, accompanied by 4 destroyers. Coast Guard cutters were drawn from multiple stations. The total operating cost approached $4,1937, roughly $80 million in modern currency. The search grid expanded in the direction of the initial assumption. But Earhart's final transmission had given the searchers a critical piece of information, and the 157-337 line. That line did not point northwest, and it ran roughly northwest to southeast, and southeast of Howland Island, in a broad arc across the open ocean, lay the Phoenix Islands. The Phoenix Islands are a group of 8 small atolls and reefs. Most were uninhabited in 1937. The largest and nearest to Howland was Gardner Island, 400 miles southeast. It had been uninhabited since the previous century. Ring-shaped coral reef, central lagoon, dense scrub, surrounding reef flats that, at low tide, exposed a broad platform capable of receiving a landing aircraft. On July 9, 1937, 7 days after the disappearance, Navy aircraft launched from the Colorado finally reached the Phoenix Islands. 3 float planes overflew Gardner. Their post-flight report, filed to the Navy and preserved in the archive, it described the island as uninhabited, but noted something specific. The pilots reported signs of recent habitation. They did not specify what signs. They did not land. The Phoenix Islands were difficult to approach from the air, and no colonial landing strip existed on Gardner. The aircraft circled, photographed, and departed. No ground search was conducted. The report was filed and catalogued. For the next 3 years, nothing further was done with it. The Navy's official assessment later concluded that the signs had probably indicated older abandoned habitation from the 19th century, when Gardner had briefly been considered for coconut plantation development. That explanation was reasonable. It was not verified. And over the same 7 days, civilian radio operators across 3 continents were writing down something else entirely. Most of the civilian operators were not amateurs. Pan American Airways maintained professional direction-finding stations at Wake Island, Midway, and Mokapu Point on Oahu. These stations existed to track their own trans-Pacific Clipper flights. Their equipment was calibrated. Their operators were trained. Their logs were submitted to the United States government daily. Beginning on July 3, 1937, all 3 Pan Am stations began logging signals on the same frequencies Earhart had been using over Howland. The signals were fragmentary. Voice, not code. Weak, but readable. They repeated the call sign KKQQ, the Electra's registered identification. Content included partial position references, fuel status indicators, and calls for assistance. The 3 Pan Am stations took bearings, Wake bearings, Midway bearings, Mokapu Point bearings. 3 lines of position drawn from 3 different geographic locations. All 3 converged on the same area, the Phoenix Islands. The most specific of the bearings narrowed the probable source to a region within approximately 100 miles of Gardner Island. The same island the Navy's own pilots would overfly on July 9th, where they would report signs of recent habitation. Pan American forwarded the bearings to the United States Navy. The Navy acknowledged receipt and continued searching primarily in the northwestern quadrant. Over the next 5 days, civilian operators across North America added to the log. In Amarillo, Texas, an operator named Mabel Laramore reported a nighttime reception of a woman's voice identifying herself as Earhart and describing an injured companion. Yet her statement was detailed enough that the government radio inspector who followed up noted the reception was technically plausible. In total, between July 2nd and July 8th, at least 57 documented signals were received. 3 were professionally triangulated. Multiple contained content that would not have been publicly known at the time of transmission. including references to Noonan being hurt and to the aircraft being stationed on a reef with water intruding at intervals consistent with tidal flooding. Skeptics have offered the grounded alternative. 1937 was the peak of civilian shortwave enthusiasm. Reception hoaxes were common. Long-distance signal propagation can produce apparent voices from atmospheric artifacts. And the emotional weight of the Earhart story produced confirmation bias among listeners. And all of these explanations are real. None of them explain 3 professional direction-finding bearings converging on the same location. The bearings were filed. The search continued northwest, and by July 8, 1937, the signals had stopped. Whatever had been transmitting for 6 days went permanently silent. 11 days later, the Navy formally ended the operation. No one would examine the bearings seriously for another 7 decades. 3 years after Navy pilots reported Gardner Island uninhabited, a British colonial officer stood over the remains of someone who had clearly survived there. In 1938, the British colonial administration initiated the Phoenix Island Settlement Scheme, an attempt to relocate ethnic Gilbertese populations onto the previously unoccupied atolls. The Gardner Island was among the first targets. A small colony was established at the lagoon's western edge. A coconut planting program began. Reef flats were cleared. Trails were cut. In September of 1940, a work party on the southeastern shore found a human skull at the base of a wren tree. The discovery was reported to Gerald Gallagher, the 28-year-old Irish-born officer serving as administrator of the Phoenix Island Settlement Scheme. Gallagher traveled to the site. What he found, he documented in telegrams preserved in the archives of the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Kiribati. Near the skull was a partial skeleton, scattered by time, weather, and scavenging animals. 13 bones were recovered in total. Near the remains was a campsite. The campsite contained traces of small cooking fires, turtle bones, bird bones, fish bones, a broken empty bottle of Benedictine, a French liqueur, consistent with aviation-era flight rations, fragments of a sextant box, the protective wooden housing for a handheld celestial navigation instrument. The box bore 2 serial numbers, and fragments of a shoe, which Gallagher described as consistent with an American-made woman's shoe. Gallagher understood what he was looking at. His telegram to his superiors, dated September 23, 1940, stated his hypothesis directly. Quote, "Have just lately found some human bones on the southeast corner of Gardner. Appear to be remains of female. Organized search of surrounding area produced a portion of a sole from a woman's shoe. Suggest bones may be those of Amelia Earhart." End quote. End. At the British Western Pacific High Commission, treated his telegram as requiring immediate review and confidentiality. Gallagher was ordered to send the physical evidence to the office of the High Commission in Fiji. The bones were packed into a wooden tea chest. The sextant box fragments, the shoe remnants, and the Benedictine bottle were crated separately. The shipment departed Gardner Island in October. The skull and remaining bones arrived in Suva, Fiji, in early 1941. There, they were referred for medical examination. Gallagher himself would not live to see the results. He died within the year. His telegrams sat in colonial archives, not declassified for decades. The bones waited on a colonial officer's desk in Fiji. What happened next closed the case for the second time. In early 1941, the 13 bones from Gardner Island reached the desk of Dr. David Hoodless at the Central Medical School in Suva, Fiji. Hoodless was not a forensic anthropologist. He was an anatomy instructor. but he was the most qualified examiner available in the colonial Pacific during wartime. Hoodless measured the bones using the standard osteometric techniques of his era. He assessed limb ratios. He estimated stature. He examined the skull's morphological features. His conclusion: male. Approximately 5 feet 5.5 inches tall. Middle-aged, likely of European or mixed European descent. Male. Not Earhart. On that determination, the case was administratively closed for the second time. The bones were cataloged, placed in storage at the medical school, and at some point thereafter, lost. No one has located them since. For decades, Hoodless's ruling stood unchallenged. It appeared in every reference text that mentioned the Gardner Island discovery. Male. Case closed. But Hoodless's original measurements survived. In 1998, forensic anthropologists first flagged potential concerns with the 1941 analysis. Hoodless had applied population standards from the 1920s, calibrated primarily to male skeletal samples. His method of sex determination relied on visual assessment of robusticity, a technique now recognized as unreliable when applied to individual specimens outside controlled populations. The measurements themselves, however, were recorded with sufficient precision to be reanalyzed. In 2018, Dr. Richard Jantz of the University of Tennessee, one of the foremost forensic anthropologists in the United States, has published a comprehensive reanalysis. Jantz used Hoodless's original recorded measurements and ran them through the Forensic Anthropology Data Bank, a modern statistical database containing thousands of skeletal profiles sorted by sex, ancestry, and stature. His findings contradicted Hoodless on every major point. The bones were more consistent with a female of Northern European ancestry. The estimated stature aligned closely with Earhart's documented height of 5 feet 7 to 5 feet 8 inches. The limb ratios matched her known proportions more closely than 99% of the reference population. Jantz's conclusion was direct. When Hoodless analyzed the bones, he lacked the statistical tools and population data to make an accurate determination. With modern methods applied to the same measurements, the bones are more likely female than male, and they are consistent with Amelia Earhart. Skeptics raise valid objections. The bones themselves are lost. Reanalysis of measurements without direct physical examination carries inherent limitations. DNA confirmation is impossible without the specimens. And Nikumaroro had hosted brief periods of habitation before Earhart's era. All of that is true. But none of it explains the woman's shoe. None of it explains the sextant box with American serial numbers. And none of it explains why a campsite with American artifacts appeared on the exact island that 3 professional radio bearings had pointed to 3 years earlier. The evidence was converging, and no one was watching. Every thread in this investigation points to the same coordinates, and no official body has ever followed them to the ground. Between 1989 and 2024, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery conducted 13 expeditions to Nikumaroro. Each visit produced additional artifacts from the southeastern shore, the same area where Gallagher found the skeleton. Fragments of a cosmetics jar were recovered. Chemical analysis identified the contents as consistent with an American-made freckle cream from the 1930s. Earhart was documented as using freckle-reducing cosmetics. Clear plexiglass was found embedded in the reef flat. Spectral analysis matched the composition and thickness to window panels used on the Lockheed Electra 10E. No other aircraft of that type is known to have operated near the Phoenix Islands. Aluminum sheeting recovered from the campsite area matched the alloy and rivet pattern used in Electra fuselage panels. tool marks on the metal suggest it had been deliberately cut and repurposed, possibly as a rain catchment or shelter component. A finger bone was recovered in 2017 from beneath the wren tree near the original skeleton site. It has not been publicly matched. Taken individually, each artifact has an alternative explanation. The cosmetics could belong to any Pacific-era traveler. The plexiglass could be maritime debris. The aluminum could originate from wartime wreckage. The finger bone remains unidentified. Taken together, the probability of all these artifacts converging on one uninhabited atoll by coincidence requires a series of independent accidents no investigator would accept in any other case. Where the evidence hierarchy is now clear. 3 professional radio bearings triangulated post-loss signals to the Phoenix Islands. Navy pilots overflew Gardner 7 days after the disappearance and reported signs of recent habitation. 3 years later, a colonial officer recovered a partial skeleton, a woman's shoe, and a sextant box with American serial numbers from the same island. Modern forensic reanalysis determined the bones are statistically consistent with Earhart. Subsequent expeditions recovered American-manufactured artifacts from the same site. No competing theory produces a comparable body of physical evidence. The crash and sink hypothesis has 0 recovered artifacts. The Japanese capture theory relies on testimonial claims without corroborating documentation. The spy mission theory has been dismissed by every credible historian who examined the classified record. Nikumaroro has bones, bearings, artifacts, and a campsite. It has never received a comprehensive government-funded forensic excavation. Amelia Earhart may have survived the flight. She may have landed on a reef. She may have lived for days or weeks as a castaway on an island that search teams flew directly over. She was not lost because the evidence was missing. She was lost because the evidence was ignored. If this investigation made you rethink what you thought you knew, hit that like button so this story reaches someone who has never heard the real evidence. And if you want to keep examining cases the official record tried to close, subscribe now. The next case file is already open.